Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's event, our Q4 2021 Transportation Trends webinar, where we'll unpack some of the trends in parcel, less than truckload, and truckload shipping for the rest of 2021 and even into 2022. I'm Katie Wild with Transportation Insight, and we've invited a panel of our transportation experts to join us today. Before we turn it over to our panel, I want to remind you that we welcome your participation. If at any point in the webinar you have a question, please submit your questions for our panelists in the GoToWebinar Questions panel. We're going to take as many of those questions as possible at the end of our presentation, and if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up directly after the webinar. To kick this off, I'm going to introduce our experts joining us today. So Todd Benj is the Senior Vice President of Parcel Solutions. He has 36 years experience in the parcel industry. Todd entered the parcel industry shortly after it was deregulated by the federal government and has seen the rapid change from a majority commercial shipping environment to a massive e-commerce delivery vehicle. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you very much, Katie, and look very forward to diving in deep into the market and where we look to be in the fourth quarter of 2021. And what's 2022 have on the horizon for us?
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. So next up is Jacob Hawkins. Jacob is the Director of LTL Pricing at Transportation Insight. He joined us in 2006 and learned to love LTL pricing starting off in our freight audit and payment group before moving over to LTL pricing. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks, Katie. What an intro. Learn to love LTL pricing. Not too many people say that probably. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about the challenges facing our LTL shippers this coming quarter.
Thank you. Next up is James Matthews. He's the Senior Director of Truckload Procurement at Transportation Insight. James brings over 20 years procurement excellence in all types of equipment for truckload and intermodal segments of North American transportation. James joined Transportation Insight in 2010. Welcome, James.
Hey, thank you very much. Looking forward to spending some time with the panel and our audience discussing what's going to be happening in the truckload market coming up.
Awesome. Thanks, James. So last but certainly not least, we have Drew Herbic. Drew is the Chief Commercial Officer at Nolan Transportation Group. He brings more than 15 years of logistics industry experience to our panel with expertise in all aspects of operations management, sales management, new business development, marketing, strategic planning, leadership, and direct sales. Thank you for joining the panel, Drew.
Thank you, Katie, for having me. Looking forward to a lively discussion, helping our shippers and carriers plan for what's going to be a lively peak season this year.
Awesome. Thanks, Drew. So before we get this formally kicked off, we're going to get the blood flowing here, and we have a fun interactive poll question for y'all. So international is obviously not included here, which I know is likely giving you some challenges, but which domestic transportation mode are you having the greatest challenges with right now? So looking really at Q4. So we're going to take a few moments to select your answer, and then we'll reveal the results later in the webinar. Also, just another friendly reminder that as questions come up, please chat them in the chat pane, and then we're going to address as many questions as possible during our Q&A portion of the webinar. All right, last few moments to enter. All right, so let's go ahead and get this kicked off. So when we look at Q4 and even into next year, when we started talking about trends, there were really some common themes across the board that are hitting on all modes. I don't think some of these are surprising for y'all. Fuel, capacity, rates. One you may not have seen as much about with all the buzz around driver shortages and Class 8 truck shortages is really around trailer challenges, which is also impacting all these modes across the board. And so we're first going to hit on fuel. So if we look at, Q4 and even into 2022, last week, according to the Energy Information Administration, diesel fuel prices reached their highest monitored point since December 15th, 2014. So we're talking a 7-year high here. If we look solely at, kind of the last 12 months, you can see how diesel fuel prices have continued to climb really in that time frame. So I think fuel is very topical and parcel. And so Todd, I'm going to start with you because for Q4, parcel is on everyone's mind. And how do you foresee fuel impacting parcel in Q4 of this year and maybe even into 2022?
So that is the story. As you can see here from the graph, it's not a good story. And, normally what we see is coming out of the summer months, we start to see the fuel starting to basically plateau, and we're not seeing that. It's still continuing to climb. And you can see that also through what the carriers are doing, and it's particularly FedEx right now. So the example I want to give you about the fuel is let's just take a look at where the fuel was at the very beginning of the year and then where we are right now. So FedEx started with a fuel table, right? So it looks at the cost of diesel fuel and then it gives you a range. Based on that range, it gives you an assessment of a percent increase or the fuel surcharge you're going to pay on each package that you ship. Well, if we take the $3.40 per gallon on this example, at the beginning of the year, you would have been paying $8.25%. In June 21st, FedEx changed that and made that in the same fuel range. Okay, we're still doing $3.40. It went to 9.5%. Okay. And if you take a look at that, that's a 15% hit. Even though it's only 1.25 points, it's still 15% increase on the fuel surcharge. Now it's announced that they're going to have another fuel table adjustment. That takes place November 21st of this year. This same $3.40 a gallon in diesel fuel now goes to 11.25% or 1.75 points increase from 9.5 to 11.25. That's 18%. If you put them together from the beginning of the year to where we're going into peak season, it's about a 36% increase. So it doesn't look good. I mean, they're passing the fuel on rapidly and quickly. So what we anticipate is that this is going to continue on in through the peak season and into the first quarter of the year. Fuel's probably going to stay at that type of level. It's probably going to go up a couple more notches. And we could see, 12.5% fuel surcharge through the fourth quarter in December going into 2022.
That's crazy. So Jacob, James, and Drew, anything else, I feel like there's a huge impact on parcel, and I think, we all need to plan on our calendars that November 21st date, but anything that y'all are seeing across LTL and truckload?
On the LTL side, FedEx doesn't make any sort of changes without doing it across all modes these days. So they made a similar announcement for any customer subject to their own FedEx fuel. A lot of our customers are subject to our own TI fuel, so they're a little bit insulated from any changes to that. But I don't really foresee too many other LTL carriers, at least, making adjustments to their fuel schedule at this point.
Got it.
In the contract truckload space, it's traditional to have a running fuel surcharge that is captured weekly updates. So for every peak and valley, that fuel surcharge adjusts, and all the carriers are standardized on that fuel surcharge. So most shippers have that kind of scale in place with their customers as well to kind of cushion the blow of rising and dropping fuel.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on top of that, what James just said there is, overall, carriers in the spot market will push this as an ability to add to their overall rate as part of the negotiation tactic. So my biggest thing I would tell all of you guys is making sure that you're checking that fuel surcharge on a daily basis to understand that impact overall.
Awesome. Okay, so big takeaways, November 21st, put it on your calendar for the next fuel surcharge, and then, really be looking at that detail on those spot rates. So the next usual suspect we have in terms of, what to look out for in Q4, I don't think that this is a surprise to anyone, is really capacity with driver shortages, truck shortages, increase in increasing shipping volume, et cetera, you're really seeing a lot of capacity constraints. And so if you look at Old Dominion, for example, a 17% increase from August 2020 to August 2021. You're seeing once again the driver shortages, and then you're seeing a lot of headlines as it relates to parcels. So you had UPS coming out saying that delivery demand is expected to exceed capacity by 5 million pieces a day, and then even regionals now like OnTrack have had to stop accepting business for peak. So Todd, I'm going to pick on you again. Parcel, a lot of headlines around this. What are you seeing, and is there anything that companies can do in Q4 if they haven't done it already to kind of combat any of these capacity challenges?
So, unfortunately, our customers are facing a lot of the same issues that the carriers are when it comes to the hub staffing and the terminal/center staffing that they're having to basically fight for the same pool of labor. So when FedEx made their announcement on the 21st of September, they talked about having staffing difficulties in their facilities. And when you have staffing difficulties in your facilities, it lends itself just for a snowball effect all the way through the entire network, and it goes on and on. And if you look at going into the fourth quarter, the worst time to be short, they've been doing peak season for very, very long time. And they always begin hiring in the end of August is traditionally always been the peak season rollout. And you've heard Amazon, UPS, FedEx, Walmart come out and state tens and tens and tens of thousands of employees they're looking to staff these facilities. And they have to have them trained up, ready to go, and coming in to be able to process this volume. So through COVID, it's been a very difficult mountain to climb. It's going to be just as difficult to be able to do and work through this shortfall of staffing, because these buildings are not like they used to be. They're all automated, and being automated lends you you have a plateau you cannot exceed. So if the building's set at 40,000 an hour, it can't go any higher. Where you used to overstaff a manual building, you could take a 40,000 hour building and push it to 60 by just overstaffing it and make up the difference. You can't do that now. So with that being said, the best thing to try to do as a customer is get the volume, forecast the volume ahead of time, and get it to the carriers, and make good communication with the carriers, and to see can they make that level of service for you, because it's going to be all about communication both ways, so that your packages can be picked up, processed, and delivered.
Awesome. And so, especially around parcel, and I didn't think about how automated these facilities are and kind of the staffing element to increase the throughput there. Jacob, from your perspective with LTL and some parcel shipments now going up to LTL due to lack of capacity, any thoughts around capacity as it relates to LTL for Q4 and even into 2022?
Yeah, LTL carriers are continuing to say they're at peak or right at capacity, and it is sort of unique in this environment currently. Normally we don't have that much parcel freight being pushed to the LTL networks, but it is something more and more as we've seen some of the parcel carriers struggle with service, that customers are consolidating more of the parcel shipments, turning them into LTL. Same thing we always see with truckload, and when truckload gets tight, some of that volume tries to get pushed to LTL. So LTL is sort of the monkey in the middle, with freight getting pushed to them from both sides right now, which is definitely one of the contributing factors to all that. We have seen a little bit of softening from some carriers, but it's very lane specific. So that's a small sort of silver lining I can give to people, in that carriers are more willing to discuss areas where they have some needs, but it's not going to be a situation where you can necessarily seek rate relief, but it is going to be a situation where you can look for some additional capacity in those strategic lanes. Like Todd's saying, though, another one of the challenges that's going to affect capacity for LTL carriers is staffing. And it's not just drivers, dock workers for the LTL carriers has been one of the biggest issues, and that's been one of the things driving some of the embargoes we've seen taking place. So carriers are doing everything they can to combat that. But we've got holidays on the horizon, so that's going to be an additional challenge for them. And then we've heard from several carriers that the vaccination requirements, what's going to happen with that? That's something they're concerned about as well when it comes to their staffing situation. One of the things as capacity tightens, carriers are looking at is, what we'll call non-conforming freight. So any freight that's not your traditional palletized B2B type freight, those are the types of shippers and shipments that carriers are continuing to target, and either price adjust or look to, almost force out of their network. Overlength freight being the sort of top concern of LTL carriers, to the point where there's a renewed emphasis on it recently from several carriers. And it is almost like they're saying, hey, this isn't meant for LTL anymore. So, we've been partnering with a lot of our customers and encourage any who haven't, engaged us already. Let's start creating backup plans now for, hey, without an LTL solution, how can we get this freight moved? It's very important because even, when things do turn, I don't know if this is freight that the LTL carriers are going to be willing to accept back into their networks. So with that said, it's the utmost importance. You continue to take care of your carrier partners. Todd mentioned communicating is going to be of utmost importance. Same thing for LTL. Leverage the technology that we're providing our customers. Make sure you look at all your options. If there's carriers you've blocked in the past, for certain lanes, where they had issues in the past and you're struggling with capacity, maybe it's time to go back and look at those. Let's reassess that and see if it makes sense to open up some of those lanes again. And the other point we've been hitting sort of for the last year really is, adjust your transits. You can't necessarily expect that 2-day lane is always going to be 2 days anymore. Build in 1 to 2 day buffers as much as possible. Set expectations with your customers, so that you can meet expectations, those reset expectations with them. And then finally, keep in mind other options, regional deferred service carriers, even local couriers. We can help, analyze those options, make recommendations, because capacity is the name of the game, as odd as it is for LTL, for that to be an issue. So we need to do everything we can to provide capacity where we can.
And kind of, I guess Drew and I are the monkey at the end then, because all of this product that Todd pushes to Jacob in the LTL space, and then these overlength, all those things push freight over into the truckload market as well. And if you take in some of the imbalances and transit issues with the intermodal space and port congestion, bogging down the drayage network, that pushes a lot of that freight into the truckload market as well. So expect capacity to be constrained through the fourth quarter. Some additional considerations that can create market imbalances, which create more capacity constraints, would be weather issues. We're still at the late season for hurricanes, coming into potential some winter storms. We saw major impacts of that last year. So any major market that is hit creates an imbalance that takes weeks to kind of unravel from. So just as news of those aren't things that you can generally plan for, but you take in addition to those things, if there is any lingering effects to the labor market caused by COVID shutdowns in certain facilities, or you're not able to staff properly, that can kind of exacerbate challenges in a certain market if a market is hit with kind of some of those shutdowns. So I would anticipate capacity remaining constrained throughout the fourth quarter. Again, we kind of had an early onset of peak season, so we're feeling that capacity constraint now. I think we were even feeling it in end of August and throughout September. So I would really kind of focus on a few key areas when you're looking at how can you maybe alleviate some of the capacity issues. And really, it's providing as much lead time. And this is not groundbreaking news. You've probably heard me say this forever. Lead time is key for letting your carriers, your contract carriers in particular, plan their networks. But now, as Drew will get into a little bit later, from trailer space and driver utilization, if you can even kind of create some space on site for drivers to lay over on your premises, provide parking, because out there's really only like one space for every 11 trucks on the road. So if you allow them that space on your site, can maybe accommodate after hours unloading or early morning unloading, and not just your typical 8 to 5 first come first serve, that's going to go a long way in that driver utilizing his operating hours the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd probably add I got a couple points I'd add real quickly, but obviously talking through all this, we know peak season is going to start early this year, right? So you think about that normal kickoff time of mid-November. I think you're going to start to see a lot of providers really start going here at the end of October, actually. And so you've probably seen in the media and the news and all the assets kind of proclaiming how this Q4 is going to be, but they're making sure that they're being proactive on this to make sure the most important packages are getting delivered by the holidays. Because the biggest thing that they know at the end of the year they're going to actually start getting pinched even more for capacity. But James touched on it as well. Some of the port congestion. I'm sure many of you have seen. All the ships sitting outside of Long Beach and LA. The one thing a lot of people aren't talking about is all the ships that are sitting out of China too. Some of their manufacturing plants are operating at 60, 70, 80%. So causing that delay on both sides. And the biggest thing that you guys are probably going to be thinking about is as you're trying to lock up, capacity and assets, it's hard to show them that visibility of when these projects are going to start because you really don't have the visibility of when they're going to be getting unloaded at the ports. But, when we talk about, FedEx and UPS having some struggles of their own from a capacity issue, and the regional providers are going to have the same issues, right? It's just a different scale that they're going to be looking at. But I've been asked this question over the last few days as we kind of just got through the end of month and end of quarter, and as we kind of get into here in Q4, it seems a little bit slower, and it's really the calm before the storm, right? These carriers are repositioning trailers and making sure that they're ready for this big peak in retail season coming up here.
Awesome. All right, so what I heard was parcel have a really solid forecast. LTL, look out for overlength, and looking at any carriers you might have ruled out in the past. And then for truckload, looking at lead time, driver layover opportunities, and then, understanding that this is kind of the calm before the storm. So those are all really great points, and understanding that we likely won't have any relief soon with the capacity crunch. So this is a topic that I was actually really excited about, because when we were talking about the key themes, Drew, you mentioned something interesting that I feel like not a lot of people are talking about, and that's trailer shortages. And so, when you kind of traditionally look at a warehouse and you look at trailers, yard storage in lieu of warehousing storage, a trailer shortage potentially has a huge impact across both, transportation and warehousing. So Drew, I'm going to start with you first this time, because this was something that you had kind of brought up. Where do you think that this will have the most material impact, and kind of when do you really see this hitting?
Yeah, no, I think to your point, Katie, a lot of people have talked about the Class A in production and things like that, but nobody's really talking about the trailers, right? And so we've kind of talked about, ourselves internally. 2022 will be kind of that year of the trailer. I was looking at some statistics the other day. When you think about the trailers that are supposed to come into the market in 2021, they were predicting somewhere between 300,000 and 600,000 trailers being delivered. Where we are actually targeting right now, it's going to be probably somewhere between 260,000, 280,000. So you can think about how that's going to be tight here through peak season, but how that will actually go into 2022 as well, as we go forward. Because the one thing that we're seeing on both ends of not only Class A truck sales, but trailers as well, a huge backlog, and in some of these situations over a year long. But I think the biggest thing that you're going to see from the shipper standpoint are these trailer pools, and as some people look at it as floating warehouses, will be much different in that 2022 year, because most of these carriers are going to be treating their trailers like gold. Already, what we're seeing from the impact on our customer side, usually in times like now, I'm starting to see requests of 5, 10, 15 trailers, because they want to have these floating warehouses on site. I'm getting requests sometimes for 50, 100 plus trailers from one in particular customer out there, right? And so these are some of the things that we're going to see, I think, go even further into peak season, especially as we get into November and December. But the one thing that we're seeing on our end, as we see this demand, most are really shocked by the sticker price. Usually when trailers are being rented for maybe $400, $500, $600 a month, there's some situations where you're seeing it almost as $1,000 a month. And so the one thing I would say to you, in the next week or two, you must be very proactive on getting this done. I think the other thing that you got to think about as well is just how your yard management looks, how those trailer pools are going to be moved around, as a lot of that time and a lot of these drivers are facilitating some of your over the road moves. This could be some of the situations that could be obviously a problem getting into peak and obviously 2022.
Wow, that's crazy. And so, Todd, obviously sometimes different equipment, trailers are still utilized, but how do you see an impact there for parcel or not really?
No, absolutely I do, because you got to look at it this way. Even though we look at parcel with the package car eye, and we look at the driver, and we look at the unloader and the unloader, what's making all the connections is the trailers. So you got the hub and feeder equipment that's moving between the centers and the hubs and the terminals. You have to still have that equipment. And during peak season, what becomes extremely difficult is because you're hiring so many new people, you've got to constant train so that they don't have the same skill level that the normal folks throughout the year do. So you have less load quality. They actually burn up more equipment because they don't load them as tight and all the way to the ceiling in small package world. So, and in doing that, they burn up a lot of equipment. I can't tell you how many times in a peak season, and this is all peak season, and this one here is going to be more difficult for the sole reason is staffing is just so difficult for this whole industry to get their hands on to staff the hub workers. But I can tell you, we would walk in and the shift before us would tell us, hey, we had to eat up all your equipment. And we would find out that we have 27 trailers short in the back of the building. That's where we load. So you got to unload them coming into the primary, the front of the building. And then as soon as you get them unloaded, you got to move them as fast as you can to catch it coming through the other side of the building. So that is a very difficult, makes for a long night. So basically, I see stuff like that happening. And you heard FedEx mention that the shortages have caused them to rehandle 600,000 packages a day. That tends to eat up equipment because it's not falling within their planned load network, because the fleet is all being balanced. And when you come outside of the norm, you're going to have these outside data points and they just start eating up equipment. And that's what is probably going to be one of the big problems that the carriers are going to have to overcome. And I know that the operators are all dreading that.
Yeah. So Jacob,
you talk about eating. Yeah, Todd led me in perfectly, Katie, because eating up equipment, that's something the LTL carriers have been challenged with, basically this whole year. And the people eating up equipment for them are these large DCs, the Amazons, the Walmarts, that they're struggling to get their LTL trailers unloaded quickly enough and get those turned and back to the LTL carriers. So these targeted embargoes we've started seeing from many LTL carriers where they're saying, hey, Amazon DC and X state, I can't accept any more freight to this one for the next 2 weeks. That's because they've got a pool of 30 to 40 trailers. They're waiting for that DC to unload, and they can't afford that problem to get any worse. So that's something we're going to continue to see as long as the volume stays at like we see it for these areas. And the other thing this has caused LTL carriers to do is focus more on detention. And it's not necessarily a money grab for them, but they're just trying to, use any tool they can to change behavior in the marketplace right now to put more pressure on everyone to, improve these processes so the trailers can get turned quicker.
I think that kind of leads into this may not be popular in this discussion, but I believe that there probably is some still trailer capacity out there. We're just not utilizing it properly. And I think that's a lot of what you're hearing from Jacob and from Todd and from Drew earlier. But if we can have proper turns at our shippers, so if you have a drop trailer program and you're not giving them enough turns to move their equipment, then that's what's bogging it down. It's because these trailers aren't being repositioned fast enough. That is key in a drop and hook situation. Truckload carriers want that situation because it maximizes what a driver can do. If it's a quick drop and hook, then they're able to go. But a lot of shippers, due to either floor space or production issues, are basically hogging these trailers for a time frame until they can build them out. Now, what I'm about to say is probably the opposite of that. Whatever you've got, whatever you can get out in regular turns, that's about 3 turns per week per trailer. If you can do that, then you're operating pretty well. All of these smaller shipments that are being pushed over from the LTL side, a lot of times shippers are shipping a trailer with just partially loaded because of the way that our buying habits are. So as a shipper, I would really try to look at your sellers and your buyers' habits. Can you allow more time for them to fill out and maximize that trailer space? Because the capacity may be there, we're just not being very efficient with it. Beyond that, I would really look at partnering with your carriers, making sure that you're dedicating lanes and committing to turning them quickly so that they can optimize their trailer network. Drew, would you add anything to that from a truckload standpoint?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there, James, and kind of what we were just talking earlier about that trailer reassignments. But no, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Awesome. All right. Well, y'all heard it here first. Drew Herbic, 2022, year of the trailer. We'll print T-shirts if it, actually happens and everything like that. So, all right. So, going back to, kind of our main takeaways or main things to look out for Q4, last but certainly not least, and I know y'all are all feeling it, is rates. Rates have continued to increase due to all the factors above, increasing volume, supply chain challenges. And really, if you look at the producer price index across parcel and LTL and truckload from the Bureau of Labor, you're really seeing tremendous growth since the start of the pandemic in that April 2020 timeframe. But the tremendous growth that you're really seeing is on the truckload side. LTL and parcel are growing significantly, but it's really truckload where you're seeing astronomical growth and kind of increases. So Todd, with it being Q4 and FedEx just announcing their GRI for 2022, what are kind of the main things that you should be on the lookout for? And then do you have any additional data points on some of these rate increases that parcel carriers are going to be imposing?
Thank you, Katie. Yes. So, the big one is the packages that don't fit the automated sort, right? So all these automated buildings, they're adding a lot more surcharges and fees and actually increasing these surcharges and fees to center around boxes that do not run across these automated belts and make for a little bit more difficult, basically delivery. But if you go back to the September 20th rate announcement by FedEx for 2022, they came out and made the announcement that it was going to be an overall rate increase of 5.9. So just a little history. Prior to this year, 5.9, the rate increase has been for ground 4.9% since 2007. So 2007, 4.9 all the way up until this coming 2022, it's 5.9. Now, along with that, if we just take a look at 2006, that was 3.9. Now, the big thing to think about is when you're looking at this graph, the 1 to 5 pounds, the lightweight packages, you can see here that you're looking at 7.4% basically rate increase. But the big driver there is the minimum charge, right? So the minimum charge is going up to $9.36. Think about what it was in 2006. It was $3.80. All right, so that's gone up 146% since 2006, the minimum charge, which is a huge driver because there is so much home delivery and residential. If you look at 2006, the network was about 25 percentage points residential. We move forward now, we're in 70% residential, 65% residential. And you can see here now the combination back in 2006, it was $5.55 to deliver a residential package. Going into 2022, it's going to be $14.11. Basically, the residential surcharge is now going to be $4.75, which, if you look at that, that's it's basically on the increase from $4.35 from last year. But I like to peg it back to 2006, and it was $1.75. So that one on its own is up about 156%. My story there is that this is outpacing CPI and PPI at a tremendous rate. And it lends itself that you have to be able to basically make sure that within your network that you're utilizing the right mode selection between a postal consolidator, between a regional consolidator, a regional carrier, and then also through the nationals. It's becoming more complex to ship small parcel for the sole reason is if you make a mistake, it really penalizes you extensively around it. One of the last points I wanted to make is really centered around these surcharges and fees. So FedEx did announce that they're going to follow UPS in additional handling. Additional handling is either dimension, packaging, or weight, and that's decided based on, again, automation, all right? So if it's too big, it can't fit on the belt, can't go through the transfers. If the dimensions, if you got the side longer than 46 inches, it can jam. So basically, they're really streamlining, and now they're going to a zonal price matrix. That zonal price matrix, if you look at the charge that it was in 2020, right? So you're looking at $14, $15. That charge is going to go up in a tiered direction based on your zone, all the way up to about 34% increase for that particular type package that you paid in 2020 for zone 7 and 8. So it's going to be more critical in your mode selection and carrier selection when you're looking through this coming year in 2022. Now, when we talk about going into the surcharges and fees, it's about, on average, about 8% overall, okay? And so not only do you have a 5.9 on transportation, you've got 8% for the surcharges and fees. The typical customer is about 20-25% surcharges and fees. So you have to actually add the two together, or I should say weigh altitude and net out your true rate increase.
Yeah, so I'll transition over to LTL, talking about FedEx, as they just announced their LTL general rate increases as well. So depending on what FedEx rate base, if you're subject to one, it's going to fall either a 5.9% increase or a 7.9% increase. And that's going to be effective January 3rd if you're subject to a FedEx Freight current rate base. Here on the screen, you can see the LTL PPI. I actually just checked for the latest numbers. And so for August 2021 versus 2020, those last 12 months, the PPI is tracking at 8.9% increase. Now that tracks with what we're seeing internally in our data as well, which that's a scary number for LTL. That's not something, you know, anyone's used to seeing really. Unfortunately, I think once the September numbers get released for the PPI, you'll see that creep up probably a little higher even. So for budget planning purposes, we're saying, you know, whether you're planning for the rest of this year or going into 2022, expect anywhere from a 6 to 12% increase on your current rates. And just sort of like Todd mentioned on the parcel side, we're seeing rates increase on minimum charges increase at a much faster rate than discounted shipments. So LTL carriers are doing the same thing they're doing in the parcel world. They're making sure those minimum charge shipments are paying out better than they have in the past because they are just seeing that many more of them.
You know, unlike a small parcel and LTL, we generally don't have like a GRI that the industry can put in front of you, like this is going into effect X date. It's much more market dynamic, and But one of the things that we can look at for the rest of the year is, and to kind of put it in perspective, it's at a high mark. It's at an extreme high mark, even from like last May. So I don't necessarily anticipate it going up much more, but kind of sticking at this high mark of where it is. You'll have pockets based off of a lot of the factors that we've already mentioned. But as far as any additional rate increases, I don't know if you'll see it except for in some specific markets. Going into 2022, aggregately for the entire year, for a budgeting standpoint, I would probably look at a 5 to 7% increase, with a lot of that being heavily weighted on the first half of the year, Q1, Q2, having a much higher, and then hopefully when some of those things that we mentioned, drivers coming online, maybe demand dropping a little bit, some of this truck supply and hopefully trailer supply coming online, well, then that'll start to lower those contracted rates some. So that 5 to 7 is really an aggregate, but look at the first half of the year being a higher increase spend year over year than it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would add on the spot side of things. If you think about it, Q2, Q3 this year, we kind of hit the height of spot market rates, and things have come down a little bit from there. But to say that they come down really at all is kind of an afterthought, right? We're still at 2018 levels right now. We all know what kind of market 2018 was. So I think we're going to continue to see the volatility in Q1 and Q2 of next year. Kind of having more of a robust spot market. But the biggest thing is going to be is, as we look at these new hires and these entrants, these Class 8 orders, and we talk about all the supply that, is eventually going to come into the market. The biggest thing is, can these OEMs catch up? And eventually they will. But to that point, that probably won't even be into the second half of 22. And like I said, it really just depends on how much actually comes to the market, not just the orders that are coming through. Because right now, demand is just outweighing the supply.
Absolutely.
Just to kind of add to that, just from where we are on a spot pricing environment, if you look at kind of the low point, it was in May of 2020 at about $1.60 a mile nationally for spot rates, excluding fuel. If you look at the first week of October, we're sitting at $2.87 per mile in just a little over a year's time frame. So the rates have absolutely just escalated since.
Awesome. Well, not awesome, but
not awesome.
but those are all great points, and I do think a lot of the rate challenges that we have seen are going to continue to kind of hit, but it will be interesting to see if we have that pendulum switch, mid 2022. All right, so those are kind of our 4 main themes of what to look for. We didn't want to seem like too much of a Debbie Downer, so did want to talk about some positives that we're seeing. Before we get to that though, do we have okay, here we go. Interesting. I thought it was going to be parcel for sure. So it looks like LTL is leading the pack with 44%, truckload with 33%. Some of y'all said all of the above with 19, and then parcel with, so it sounds like everybody did their homework and they're ready for peak season, which is great to hear.
Katie, unfortunately, I'm not surprised at all.
You aren't? Okay.
No.
All right, well, Jacob will be revealing his email address later. You can personally email him and ask him any of your questions. So, all right, so some positives. So I wanted to make sure, there are some good things that have happened, and, Todd, parcel is top of mind for me because I literally had a package delivered during this webinar. I'm glad that my dogs didn't freak out, but, we've talked a lot about peak season and capacity, but I think in 2021, consumers have kind of, you hear more and more people talking about supply chain. Consumers with COVID, with last year, and even some of this year, they've gotten used to supply chain delays. And so, the general expectation of 2 to 3 days delivery, I think consumers are a little bit more flexible following COVID versus, holiday 2019, when I know that I personally was delivering or ordering stuff on December 20th and expecting to get it by Christmas Eve. And so, any thoughts on some of the good that's come out of 2021 and anything that, is kind of positive as we look forward to 2022?
It's a great question. So if you take a look at one of the things that COVID has done and stressed these networks, what it has done is made our shippers hopefully become better at communicating to their customers. One of the things that we've done a lot of research on before is what is it better? Is time in transit the main concern, or is it really reliability? Getting it there when you tell them it's going to be there. One of the things I think COVID has done is reset that expectation. Instead of, hey, I need it in 2 days, if you tell me it's going to be there Wednesday and it delivers there Wednesday and it took 3 or 4 days, I'm happy because I could plan for it and expect it. I think that is probably a very big positive that comes out, because you can have better network and alignment and design so that you can get control of your cost, because one thing that's happened is cost. Cost has definitely outpaced any past year for COVID because of all the surcharges and fees. But along with that, one of the things that it's done is made customers start to realize and track and see, how much did that free package, that free shipping package really cost me? Because, exactly. So at the end of the day, we came up with a margin management tool, but basically helps identify which shipments or which items may be the ones you want to use BOPUS and drive your customer in, buy online and pick up in store, because that particular item costs a lot of money to get it delivered to the house. And it might not align with the profit in which you have aligned with that particular SKU. So those are areas where I see that this is highlighted and brought to light better decision making, instead of just blanketly send it down the belt and give it to UPS, FedEx.
Yeah, and you can copy and paste everything Todd just said on parcel for LTL really as well. I mean, the margin management piece and the number of customers we've had discussions with this year that weren't doing a good job of passing along their shipping costs to their customers was astounding. And this has forced a lot of customers to realize that now and correct that, which is going to make their businesses better moving forward. Same thing on the transit piece Todd mentioned. Time and time again, what we've heard from customers, what I think the LTL carriers are now really hearing from customers is that, if it's a 2-day lane, but you're only hitting it 4 days, just tell me it's 4 days. That's what I need to be able to do, is set proper expectations within my company and with my customers. And I know we've heard from a couple carriers where this hasn't really been publicized, but they have shared, they've done their own polls and they've heard that loud and clear from customers. So instead of carriers thinking about transit time as a competitive tool in order to gain more business, I think they're going to start thinking about, hey, it's not about it being faster, it's about it being more realistic and what the customer can really expect us to deliver on.
Thinking of kind of the silver lining in the truckload market, we've talked a lot about rate increases and the reasons for that. But what it actually does is it does make some of these carriers a little bit more profitable. It gives them more money where they can do some things like investing in new equipment that is coming at a premium. And then also enticing drivers into the market, which is also coming at a premium. But with that, it does set the table to have kind of longer term relationships, capacity commitments on lanes, because these carriers, once they've made that capital investment, they're going to want to lock in long term so that they can keep that freight moving and profitable. So for me, I think a lot of the things that we've experienced has set the table for a long-term sustainable carrier base, where you may not have to churn it or turn as much as we have in this past year over into the spot market.
Yeah.
Drew, would you add anything?
Yeah, I think the thing I would probably add, James, when I think about where we're at right now, from the customer standpoint, everybody's talking about, the transportation costs are up. I think from a planner standpoint and transportation managers are kind of sick of seeing these high rates. At the same time, though, too, it's driving a lot of demand and probably more revenue for some of these customers. It's probably also having, likely a greater impact on the overall success of that company. So we are seeing a surge in demand across multiple sectors. And I think to James's point as well, carriers, in 2021 are looking like the same way that they were in 2018. So there are some positives coming out of this.
Yeah, James, I think that's a great point on the carriers. I mean, on the LTL side, we're not that many years removed from carriers being happy with break even or very minimal operating ratios. So great point.
Well, and I will say that because of a lot of those challenges, I don't expect rates to come back down where they're just going to be, slashing and burning rates, but you will see rates come down along with that in a contractual environment in particular to lock into that long-term capacity or volume.
Right.
Another
Parcel
silver
carriers are
lining.
knocking it dead too on the operating ratios. So best ever. So.
Awesome. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. So I think, and we've got a few questions to address. So if y'all want to speed through each of, one key takeaway that you would tell the audience for Q4 and kind of beyond. And so Todd, do you want to kick it off?
Absolutely, thank you. So I come from an engineering background, so I'm always centered around, analytics and operating plans, and having a master operating plan and strong analytical support to help you understand where you're going, where you've been, and where you need to go. And I think that's a key takeaway is that you can never have too many analytical support. So, and that's one of the best things we do at TI.
Awesome. Jacob, LTL?
I mentioned it when I was talking about capacity previously, but overlength freight, if you have any overlength freight in your network, let's start planning now for how to get that moved outside of an LTL solution, because I do feel strongly that is freight LTL carriers are pushing out of their networks and are not going to reluctantly accept even when the tide turns. So let's look at other options, whether it's partial truckload, truckload with stop-offs, more specialized service providers. Let's figure out another solution.
Got it. All right, James, truckload.
I think this past year more than any, a lot of shippers were kind of shipping partials as full truckloads, in effect doubling the demand for capacity, artificially creating that demand. So I would make sure that you're having a laser focus on maximizing your trailer space and your trailer turns.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on what James was saying there. I think, all of us need to be thinking differently about, our operation as we go forward, right? Whether that's looking at truckload, LTL, or your final mile, don't just assume the old way was the right way to ship your product, right? A lot of changes have happened since COVID. So I think the one thing you got to think about is looking at your operation a little bit differently too. And the one thing that we are hearing from a lot of our customers is, the willingness to share space with other customers' product to make sure that you're getting the best service and cost at the end of the day for your team.
Great. All right. Well, thank y'all for your kind of key takeaways. So we did have a few questions come in, and I know we only have a few minutes left. So I am going to go through those. So the first question, I think this is probably best for James or Drew to answer, but do you have any insight into intermodal and drayage market, especially as it relates to asset shortages?
Drew, I'll kick off and then please tell me what it looks like through your lens. But the shippers that are managing the drayage network, there is a true constraint there from both a labor and a chassis standpoint. So kind of honoring those relationships that you've got, also looking for some niche providers, utilizing brokerages that have, and this isn't a true plug for you, Drew, but it sounds like it, but utilizing brokerages that have a base of drayage partners has been extremely beneficial to our managed trans clients. So I would explore all of those from a drayage standpoint. From the intermodal side, we've seen more freight being pushed from the intermodal to the truckload due to transit times. One of the things I think that you can look at is a lot of the reason for that, not only the transit times, but also the per diem charges and a lot of the kind of penalties they're experiencing. I've said this once before, but I will say it again. If you can schedule an appointment within 24 hours of deramping and then have that container unloaded within 24 hours of arrival, that's going to start smoothing out some of the equipment imbalances in the intermodal, but you won't see a whole lot of truckload to intermodal conversion take place until that happens.
Yeah, no, James, I'll take that layup greatly from our end, because I think on the NTG side, that's something that we're obviously trying to provide, right? And so you think about the drayage capacity and what's out there. I think it's really the ability for us to work with some of those small carriers, right? Those 1, 10, 15, 20 truck operation units that can give you more scale and capacity in your network. You know, the one thing I think about too when James talks about, you know, intermodal and really the rail, you know, in years past, you know, I think the one thing was it was a cost savings opportunity, but the one thing you saw was, you know, customers in general, you know, from like raw materials that you really utilized, you know, rail and things like that. Now today, just the demand and the increase in getting that supply to them, you know, rail isn't even an option anymore. So you're having to go truckload or having to go LTL because of the speed to get the product out there to people right now.
Got it. All right, we have one more question. And I think that this is parcel related, and then we may have to answer some of the other questions offline. So Todd, do you see the COVID surcharges being dropped next year?
It's a great question. I can just say this. If you look at what was announced by FedEx on the 20th of September, UPS will announce in probably another 4 or 5 weeks. Their rate increases are pretty substantial, and they've adjusted the fuel again here in the first week of November. So I think that they're setting themselves up for that. We can't continue on in this quote world of the COVID, that we have to learn and deal and live with it. And so I anticipate that probably sometime within the first quarter of 2022, my estimation is that they will rescind it, go back, or have just you know, completely eliminate it wholeheartedly. And it may only be on those difficult packages to fit into automation.
Got it. Okay. Well, the questions that we didn't get to answer, we will follow up after. So thank y'all so much for attending today. And we appreciate your time. If you want more information, you can visit transportationinsight.com. And we also have a Q4 forecast guide out there as well. So on behalf of our panelists in Transportation Insight and Nolan Transportation Group, thank you for joining our broadcast and have a great day.